2023 has seemingly been a non-stop avalanche of great games. I don't know about you, but I can barely keep up with finishing them, let alone trying everything. Sadly, amongst all these games are some awesome ones people are overlooking. So in this video, I'll be sharing 5 hidden gem JRPGs you probably missed this year. Now, starting off the list, we have probably the most well-known game, Cassette Beasts. At first glance, it looks like a Pokemon-inspired monster taming game, but once you start playing it, it's much more than that. When you begin the game, you wash up on a beach in a mysterious town, only to learn that you can't leave, or so you think. The game is all about learning the mysteries of this new world and trying to find a way to return home. Gameplay-wise, it is pretty similar to Pokemon in that battles are turn-based and you can obtain monsters' powers for yourself. That said, there are a few twists. For one, you don't fight with the monsters directly, you actually transform into them. And secondly, you always have a teammate with you that can also transform into a variety of different monsters. In somewhat of a throwback to Jade Cocoon, you can also fuse together to form one big monster. And what's cool is there's a unique combo monster for seemingly every combination of 2 monsters. I don't know if there is, but every time I combine monsters, they were different. And when you fuse together, you get one big moveset, and I think you also hit harder and have more HP. Now, instead of catching monsters, you record them to these cassette tapes, and for you youngins out there, cassettes were the physical format for music and audio before CDs. And of course, like Pokemon, your monsters can evolve once they reach a certain star level. Combat itself is actually pretty challenging, even when you outlevel your opponent. I often found that I needed to rest up at campfires to heal up. Now, like Pokemon, each monster kind of has a type to it, and you can inflict some interesting properties when you attack enemies. For example, if you poison certain enemies, it'll coat them in poison, and when you attack them, you'll get poisoned back. Now, unlike Pokemon, you don't go around getting badges or defeating bosses. Instead, this game is much more quest-based. You're sent out to the world to solve mysteries or defeat certain enemies. For example, one of the recurring enemies are these vampire real estate agents, kind of a unique plot point. And shockingly, the game is pretty puzzle-heavy. Oftentimes, you'll go into different environments to flip switches or perform different platforming puzzles. I actually really like this as it gave this type of game kind of a unique twist. But for me, I feel like its biggest selling point is its presentation. It has this really gorgeous Paper Mario-esque look with the 2D character models in a 3D world. It has such a beautiful color palette and kind of a low polygon look. It sort of reminds me of a PS1 RPG, which hits me right in the nostalgia. And for a game called Cassette Beasts, the soundtrack is kind of unexpected. It almost doesn't fit the vibe of the game at all. Most of the time you kind of have this lo-fi ballad playing. It is very odd. Take a listen.
Floating somewhere without any aim, but at least we're together.
Overall though, it is an excellent game, and if you like these types of games, you should really check it out. With the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters recently releasing on consoles, I figured some of you might be in for an 8-bit throwback RPG like 8-bit Adventures 2. Now, before I dive in, I want to preface this by saying 2 things. First of all, the game doesn't have a ton of modern quality of life niceties, nor is there some kind of clever twist like in The Messenger. It's just straight up an 8-bit RPG, faithful to all the limitations of those old systems. Secondly, I'm not a huge fan of retro RPGs, but I know there's quite a few of you out there that are, so I thought you might enjoy this. Now, back to the game itself. Like I said, it is a love letter to 8-bit RPGs, complete with Ninja Gaiden-inspired cutscenes, no-frills turn-based combat, and even a 4:3 aspect ratio. That said, combat isn't simply mashing the attack button over and over. It does have some clever things. For example, certain characters have varying levels of attack. Low hit percentage but high damage, kind of middle in both, and then high hit percentage but low damage. So it's kind of this interesting risk-reward mechanic. And there's also character-specific classes with unique abilities. For example, there's a thief that can steal things, poison enemies, etc. Also, there's a super meter at the bottom of the screen that will always build up towards some sort of big attack. Now, it does have some cool environmental puzzles and exploration pieces that I've never really seen in an 8-bit RPG before. For example, you set up ropes that you can climb down, there's barrels that you can push to cross over sewers and things like that. I also love that the game warns you when you're about to come across a tough boss battle by putting these little shiny spots around the environment. You can save whenever you want, but this literally just serves as a reminder. As for the story itself, you play a character named Charlie, and he's an academy student training to be a soldier. One of his longtime heroes is in town looking for her lost adventuring partner. Charlie longs for adventure himself, escapes the academy, and stows away on a ship to help out his longtime hero. From there, you'll go on a globe-trotting adventure fighting all kinds of monsters and menaces. And in the end, it clocks in at around 25 hours. If you love classic 8-bit RPGs, this is one that you shouldn't miss. Fuga Melodies of Steel 2, the follow-up to the 2021 hidden gem, released this year, and I bet no one watching this video knew about it. Why? Because it released 2 days before Zelda. Whoever made that decision needs to be fired because they ended up burying an absolutely phenomenal game. Now, I'd be lying if I didn't say it's more of the same, but the formula here is so incredible that, hey, I'll take more of the same. Of course, there's still plenty of new features and a rather gripping story. It's been a year since the events of the first game, and all the children are asked to return to their tank, the Tyrannus, as soldiers working on it can't seem to get it open. However, after getting the tank open and having some of the children go inside, it starts to move on its own, and the children are seemingly possessed by some sort of weird power. There's also a new ominous character that seems to be controlling the children, and you and the rest of the other children that weren't in the tank chase them down to try and save them. This was a great way to make an already compelling story even more compelling. There's also a new character named Vanilla who's a little bit more bossy and kind of adds an interesting dynamic to the team of characters who are mostly nice and well-mannered. In terms of the core gameplay loop, it remains fairly the same. You follow a fairly linear path, get into battles, possibly heal up your tank, pick up items, and then it culminates at a big fight at the end. Now, for those unfamiliar, the combat takes place in turn-based fashion, where each enemy kind of has a weakness that you need to hit. And once you hit them with their weakness, it'll delay their turn. Now, some enemies also have certain armor levels that you'll need to break down if you want to do any kind of serious damage, and this ends up making for a really dynamic strategy combat system that's super fun. A big boss fight is usually followed up by a town where you can go resupply and talk to different characters. Something new that they added here were decisions during conversations. Depending on how you answer these questions will dictate where on a meteor you'll go one way or another, and depending how far down one side or the other you go, you'll get new abilities that unlock in combat. Now, replacing the spirit cannon where you would sacrifice a character to essentially end a fight is a new cannon that won't kill the character but will disable them for a battle, and you'll need to rest them up if you want to use them again, still giving that feeling of high stakes. I really love video games where you have a variety of gameplay, so you're constantly hopping from one thing to the next and it never gets boring, and here in Fuga Melodies of Steel 2, they managed to do that in an excellent way. There's such great pacing with whatever you're doing, and I always wanted to keep playing to get to the next part of the game. I really enjoyed the first game, and as I got back into the loop of the second one, I found myself falling in love all over again. I know there are tons of great games on the horizon, but please, 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 make sure you make time for Fuga Melodies of Steel 2 because it's absolutely excellent. Meg's Monster is one of those games where you need to get tissues ready because it's a real tearjerker. The basic setup is that a young kid named Meg has fallen into the underworld with lots of monsters and she's trying to find her way back to her mother. However, she doesn't know how to get back and she's aided by this weird looking monster named Roy. At first, Roy just wants to get her out of his hair. However, if Meg cries too much, it damages the monsters and they could all die. So Roy ends up really falling in love with this kid and wants to help her find her mother. It's a very, very sweet story that you will absolutely love by the end of the game. I will admit that Meg's Monster is much more about the story than the gameplay. However, that's not to say the gameplay isn't interesting or fun, because it definitely is. And I don't know if I'd call it a JRPG necessarily, it's more of an adventure style game with turn-based combat. As the story manages to move along, it's very linear and you'll be given an exclamation point on your map to know where you have to go next. And every once in a while there will be a green one which provides side content. Usually at each different story segment, Roy needs to fight off some kind of monster. Now there's an interesting wrinkle to combat. While it is turn-based, Roy has a ton of HP and he'll probably never die. However, you need to watch out for Meg. While she doesn't get damaged directly, she has heart health. Basically, it really hurts her heart every time Roy gets damaged. And so to make sure she doesn't cry and basically end the game, you have to soothe her. And the way you do this is really cute. Basically, you find toys as you explore the world, and each time she starts to get sad, you give her a toy to play with, and that raises her happiness. And what's really cute about each of the different healing items is that there will be moments where you and Meg will play with them together. It provides some really cool context and really ties it in with the theme and makes it feel cohesive. Now, Meg's Monster is a fairly short game, so to say any more would almost spoil it, but I'll just say that if you want a heartwarming game that doesn't last very long, isn't very expensive, but is really, really good, definitely check out Meg's Monster. And last but certainly not least, we have Dungeon Drafters, maybe my favorite game on this entire list. It's certainly the game I spent the most time with. Now, I will say this, it has virtually no story, it's basically all about the gameplay, but if you love mystery dungeon games, strategy RPGs, or collectible card games like Magic the Gathering, Dungeon Drafters is going to have you super addicted. At the beginning, you select a character, and for those that are familiar with Magic the Gathering, basically your set of colors that you use when you're building your deck. And from there, it's essentially a strategy RPG roguelike. You'll enter a room and there's a group of enemies in that room that you need to defeat before you can advance to the next room. Now, when it's your turn, you have a limited number of actions that you can take per turn in the form of AP. Basically, anything you do from attacking, casting a card, or moving costs AP. You have to be very thoughtful and methodical in how you want to plan out your turns. Now, while it sounds hard and maybe even annoying, once you get the flow of the game and how it works, it becomes very, very addicting. As you clear rooms, you'll be awarded money and booster packs, and that's kind of the core of the game. Do you want to keep going to the next floor to get further into the dungeon and maybe even defeat the boss, or do you want to end your run early so you can go back to your home base, open your booster packs, and maybe even buy more cards to build a stronger deck? And the way dungeons are laid out make it manageable. Sure, you'll have plenty of rooms where you fight enemies, but there's also a lot of puzzle rooms where you'll need to figure out a puzzle, and if you can solve it, then you'll unlock a treasure room where you can get tons of boosters, refill your life, and get extra money. There's also rooms where you can refresh your deck along the way. Essentially, any card that you've already casted will get put back into your main deck, and you can also refill your life there. But again, as you go further into the dungeon, there's sort of this risk reward of, hey, the enemies are going to get harder and you're going to have less opportunities to heal, but the rewards will be greater. And what's cool is it's not the same dungeon every time. You have 5 choices of which dungeon you want to explore. Each dungeon has its own unique set of cards, so the further you explore all the different dungeons, the more sets you'll unlock. And there's a tavern back at the home base that each time you unlock a new card, you'll be able to buy more of them. Think of it like going to a card store to buy more cards to fill out your deck. Now, along the way, you'll be given quests from various NPCs in the hub town, and these will be like activating certain cards per turn, escaping without getting hit, things like that. And each time you complete a quest, you'll be given money, booster packs, and other items. Now, as far as I've played, you can equip 5 runes, and runes essentially represent either different colors for each character, or you can boost your character with them. These are important because certain cards require a certain number of runes, or you won't be able to put them in your deck. For example, I'm red and green, and I kind of have a balance of how many runes I have of each. It can take a bit to cast the most powerful cards. I would need to basically go all red or all green if I want to use the most powerful cards. Also, in case you haven't noticed, I think this game is absolutely gorgeous. It has an absolutely stunning saturated color palette with some really great pixel work. It was always really fun to go into a new dungeon and see the new enemies and the new environments. All the games in this list are really fantastic. I wouldn't have recommended them if I didn't think they were. But if I were to recommend just one game on this list, it would definitely be Dungeon Drafters. It was the game I had the most fun with, the game that hooked me the longest, and honestly was probably the strongest game overall. The only reason you wouldn't want to pick this game up is if you want to play for a story because there basically isn't one. But other than that, the game is super fun, and you'll definitely want to check it out. Now, if you like this video and want to check out another one all about some great JRPGs, make sure you check out this video right here. And special thanks to Reset Switch, Tyler Kuzawa, and the Miyazaki Man for supporting me over on Patreon. To get exclusive videos and other cool perks, consider supporting me over on patreon.com/thegaming shelf. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.